Welcome back to the Shared Services Advantage series. In episode 1, we talked about the why shared services matter, and how they create leverage for scaling field service private equity platforms. And today, we're moving from the why to the what, because, everyone talks about shared services, but what does it actually look like inside a platform company? Some folks picture a big corporate HQ team parked in a tower somewhere, but in reality, it can start as small as two people handling billing across the platform, or a scale into a team of 100 of FTEs supporting finance, HR, IT, customer support, and more. So there's really no one size fits all model, but there is a pattern. And that's what we're breaking down today. So in today's episode, I'm joined by my co-host Gyner Ozgul from his new office to talk about what shared services really looks like on the ground and how to think about structuring the model. So Gyner, how are you today?
Good, good. You notice the new background? It's not blue walls anymore. So blue skies, not blue walls.
Exactly, blue sky. So, well, talking about blue sky. So, before we dive into today's episode, maybe we can talk about maybe the language around shared services, because depending on who you ask, you'll hear shared services called a bunch of things. Corporate, central ops, back office, HQ functions, and and for a lot of operators, especially in field services, that language can feel a little bit disconnected from what's really going on, and it sounds a little bit enterprisey or worse,
Yeah.
top down, like some distant team is stepping in to take over, and that's where you start getting friction. Local leadership starts resisting it because it feels like control is being pulled away from the local team. But that's really what not shared service is about. Is
No,
not, at least not
no.
in the way we define it. So maybe I'll share my definition, Gina, and I'd love to hear your definition on how you think about shared services. And but the way I like to frame it is, shared services is a centralized team that runs essential, commoditized, repeatable processes, and that every function needs, or every brand rather needs. So you don't have to rebuild them from scratch every time you grow. And when you centralize those functions, it means brands can scale faster, you can integrate acquisitions faster, operators can focus on field execution and core work, and leadership has visibility across the portfolio. So Giner, I'm sure I'm sure you've had to explain this a few different ways to different teams, especially when you're first standing up shared services. So anything you'd add here about how to get folks aligned around the purpose of shared services early on, and what it might mean, and how to maybe reduce that friction?
Yeah. So the way I think about it, or the way I'm articulating that is in the past, is to think about it as like when you put companies together, incrementally new work exists, more work exists, right? Um, and that's important for people to understand that new work exists, and
Mm,
that's incremental. So the shared service group then takes on some of that incremental work, right?
mm-hmm,
And so that the company, the personnel and the companies that we've purchased can continue to operate the way they have in the past, which is focusing on customers, focusing on the staff and the business,
mm-hmm,
and driving the effectiveness of the business. So that's one. The other one is, as you grow as a platform, you start to grow faster at some point than you were accustomed to as a smaller company.
mm,
And the growth outpaces your ability to bring people on, right?
mm,
So then accommodating that, the shared service group can offload some of that pressure and
mm.
scale faster as the business grows, so that that there's a quorum that's left in those businesses of people that were always there to begin with and we're continually adding to, but we're building a shared service group that takes some of the, what I'll call the kind of administrative activities away
Mm.
from them, so they could be a little bit more customer focusing, or technician focused, or sales focused, where they have a lot of intrinsic value and an ability to really deliver something incremental.
I love that. And now that we've cleared that up, maybe let's dive into the three different major models we see across the market, and you really, you'll see probably variation on this, but broadly speaking, there's three models you'll see across the industry. You've got captive, outsourced, and hybrid. And each one has pros and cons depending on where you are in your growth cycle as a platform.
Yeah.
But more importantly, it depends on how fast you need to move, how mature the process is, availability of talent, and how strategic it is, that process to your value creation plan. So maybe, Gyner, let me walk through each of them, and I'd love to get your take as we go, especially around what you've seen work and where the landmines are. So, the first kind of setup or model is like captive shared services, or what you might call in-house. And this is where you build and manage the shared service center internally, and it's typically built onshore. It's fully staffed, fully controlled by you and by your team, by your internal team, and it's fully integrated with the business. And that could include HR, IT, customer service, finance, the whole thing, and all the systems needed to operate. So you, we find folks typically use this model when they need tight control
Yeah.
over processes tied directly to value creation plans like FP&A, pricing, reporting, and you already have access to talent, whether even onshore, offshore. Captive could also be offshore. You could be, flying to India or to the
Yeah.
Philippines and setting up your own site. So, and you can absorb that cost. And this is where you're really playing the long game, and you want to build institutional capability within the platform. And some of the considerations you might want to take into your calculation is typically standing up a captive site. It's a longer execution cycle. It typically takes really 12 to 18 months before you start seeing results.
Yep.
It has a high upfront cost, right? Think facilities, leadership, and it's not just about the people. It's also the systems, the culture, the
Yeah.
capability. But the upside, you get high control, tight integration with your core team, and alignment with your
That's
operating
right.
culture and brand. So, Gyner, what I've seen is that captive works really well when the platform is mature and has the time to build. But I've also seen folks try to go captive too early and stall out, and skyrocket their SG&A and
Yeah.
facility costs. So, what's your experience with that? And when does captive actually make sense? And what does it? And when does it actually just slow things down in your experience?
Yeah. As I think about captive, I also think a little bit of, the last 5 years or so, the industry in general, or the work environment in general, has this word hybrid. So is it really captive, right?
Mm,
And the idea of building a hybrid workforce and building a captive workforce come into conflict with each other. And to
mm,
me, hybrid feels more like, hey, you're really building a remote shared services model, right?
mm,
And so if you're captive, like as a CEO of a business, if someone came to me and said, I want to build a captive internal shared service team, I'd say, great. They're coming in the office 5 days a week, right? Well, no. Well, then they're not captive, right?
mm,
You're building a remote workforce.
mm,
Then then I start to say, well, then I want to look at options to look externally. And
mm,
captive is hard,
mm.
right? In
Why?
my past, I'll give you an example. In my past, one of my areas of oversight was a call center for a period of
Mm,
time. That call center happened to be in a area of Indianapolis, Indiana, where there's other call centers right
mm,
around us, right? And the attrition rate was just abhorrent. And it wasn't because anybody was doing wrong. We had great managers, great culture.
right,
We were part of a Fortune 200 company with really
right,
good benefits, but they could literally walk across the street and get $1 more an hour.
right,
And they did. Like,
right.
and their people would come to us for $1 more an hour. And you just had this constant churn, you
Mm,
know, because you were captive and you
mm,
weren't, and, you fool yourself into believing that there's stability with captive. And there
mm,
isn't, because that
mm,
churn is work. That churn gets in the way of your customer experience. That churn frustrates your employees because the person that was there 2 days ago that I just spent 6 months training is not there anymore. Right.
mm,
So that gets in the way of scale. Right.
mm,
So my experience personally with captive is it's challenging and it hasn't been good. Doesn't mean it's been great for others and it's worked.
right.
So like, to be fair to the audience out here, it for me, captive has not worked well over time. Now, I want to caveat that, because that's applicable to building captive, not existing captive, right?
Mm,
So, if you have a team internally, this is, it's where Yassin started in this conversation. That is not the objective of building outsourced resources, right? The objective is for those resources to be added to a captive team that already exists, that's mature and is already performing.
exactly, exactly. And this gets me to the second model, which is the outsourced shared services. And you can call it augmented or outsourced. And this is where you partner up with a BPO. BPO stands for business process outsourcing provider, or a managed services partner, who builds and runs the function for you end to end. And that includes recruiting, training, managing the team, handling the execution, implementing the governance, while you stay focused on the outcomes and you manage through SLAs.
Right.
And we typically see this work when um, executives need to move fast, especially after a deal closes or during carve outs, or fast growth, and a very aggressive M&A growth strategy. And typically the processes that get outsourced to a BPO partner, they're typically transactional and repeatable in nature. Think invoice processing or
Yeah.
tier one technical support or customer service. And this is where the focus is on optimizing your OPEX, and your CAPEX, right? And you are bringing in, or maybe you don't have the transformation capability or the technology capability, and you want to lean on a BPO vendor who's done these who's run these functions across hundreds of other clients, and they can bring their own experience, and lean transformation capabilities to give you really predictable costs while avoiding the overhead of building it yourself. Now, some of the considerations to take into account is this is where you kind of trade some control for speed and scale.
Yes.
And it only works if you invest in governance. It's not like set it and forget it and you're hands off. And this is where
No.
this model breaks down. It only works if you really invest in governance, and we're talking, defining the SLAs, making sure you're doing QBRs, quarterly business reviews with your vendor. You have change control mechanisms, and but when done right, it's really perfect for early stage platforms, especially when you're integrating multiple brands and you just need to stabilize quickly, or you're in a high churn environment. So, Gyner, I know you've been through the chaos of post-close integration and acquisition, where things need to get operational quickly. Would you say outsourced shared services is the fastest way to get stability, or have you seen situations where handing things off too fast created new risks?
Both,
Mm.
right? Um,
To explain.
Outsourcing. So let me explain. I have seen it done well. Yeah, I'll say my teams have done it well and not well.
Mm,
Well was when we allowed our partner to work with us to map out the process, to build the scalability, to figure out like the resourcing, and when we add resources over time, and what's the right pace of adding resources, and working
mm,
with teams on that, um, etc. Right? That's when we did it well. When we didn't do it well is when we went into certain functions and we said, hey, we're just going to add people to our people to help with the improving the output, right?
mm,
But we didn't map the process. We didn't create a baseline for the metrics. We didn't really set objectives for what we were trying to improve. We didn't create a problem statement, right?
mm.
And that
And
didn't
we'll
go
have
so
a whole
well.
episode about problem statements, but
Yeah,
yeah,
but that didn't go so well, right?
right.
It's what you just said. Then
Mm,
you're misguided. Then the teams start at odds with each other. Then there's a conflict with the partner because you're telling the partner they're not adding value, and the truth is they're adding the same value at a lesser price that your existing entre resources are. Frankly, um, it's just you haven't defined the
but the
problem
process is not
statement, and the
stable.
process
Yeah.
isn't stable, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think you bring a very important topic, and I think one of the rubric or the decision making flow, which we'll get into in a little bit. Process maturity is key, and whether you're doing it with a outsourced vendor, or you're just setting up a captive shared services, mapping the processes and identifying the RACI, who's accountable, who's responsible for what step in the value stream, yeah, can save you a lot of headache. And which gets me to the third model, which is really hybrid, or what you call co-managed shared services. And this model blends both worlds, right? So you've got your strategic processes like maybe
Yep.
FP&A or treasury staying in-house or captive, while transactional work like billing, collections, dispatch, payroll is centralized and often handled offshore or nearshore. And we find platform or executives typically use this when they want to retain control where it matters, but still drive efficiency in back office processes. They're in a transformation phase where they're shifting from decentralized operation to a more integrated model. And you want to test and learn, starting small before going all in on a captive or outsource model. And it's typically easier to just bring outsource a process, see how it works, and then scale back, or start small and go all in. So some of the considerations you want to take into account is the split ownership can cause confusion, like you said, Gyner, if roles and accountability aren't clearly defined. And this is where really coordination is everything, especially when internal and external teams are both in the mix. Um, you know, um, Onshore handles step 1 2 3, then offshore does 4 5 6, and then they pass it back, right? So this it really requires a high level of coordination. But for most PE-backed platform in the 50 to 150 million dollar range, this end up being the sweet spot.
Hmm.
It balances control, you reduce your SG&A, and you drive scale without losing a strategic edge. And this is what we're seeing more and more with platforms we work with, that they're keeping decision making and cash control internally, but offloading the repetitive work. So Gina, what's your take on the hybrid model, and where does it shine, and where do people get tripped up by this?
What's really important if you're like first entering into the outsource or offshore model is that you pick a process that you know can be repeatable. It might not be
Mm,
repeatable today, and you still
mm,
have to map it out and work on it. But the initial use case should be really focused on repeatable process
mm,
because that's where you're going to see the best value. If you're trying to bring a very complex manual process and outsource it as your first use case, you're going to fail.
yeah.
And it's going to turn you off. It's going to turn your team off. You're going to get the wrong impression of it. So that's why people lean in on things like billing, APAR, customer service to
Mm,
start in roles like that. Not
mm,
because the other ones are important, it's because typically there's some level of repeatability in those roles, right?
mm,
And you may not even be the expert to identify the repeatability, but a good partner, like when we partnered with Origo, they helped us map out our processes. And then we looked at them and we said, oh, we can make that more repeatable, right?
mm.
And we could take a portion of our process and outsource it and leave the exceptions to our team because our team is more the experts,
Yes.
right? So that's how we thought about it. And that's how we kind of advanced the partnership and continued to build it over time.
I love it. So maybe this. So if we want to kind of like distill the decision making flow, and this is kind of how we go about things when we're helping clients, like you said, Giner, decide on which model to go with, and we can simplify it into four key questions. The first question you want to ask is the process strategic or transactional? If it's strategic, then you might want to consider captive or hybrid. If it's transactional, this is where you want to consider outsourced. The next question is, do you need speed or do you need control? If
Yeah.
it's speed, then it's outsourced. If it's control, then it's captive. The third question is the process mature? Is it stable? There's not a lot of variation. There's no defects, right? And is it documented? So is the process mature and is it documented? If it's yes, then really any model works, right? If
Yes.
it's no, then start with outsource or hybrid to stabilize first. And the fourth question is, do you have access to capable talent? This is sometimes really the key question you have to ask. If you have access to the talent, and like Giner said, it's not a high churn role. then captive is very viable. If you don't have access to talent and or you don't, there is some retention issues. This is where you want to consider an outsourced, which is could be the safer bet. So, Gyner, when you're sitting with a management team, trying to figure this out, do you start with these kind of questions, or are you focused more on like pain points and value capture?
Um, I'm really focused on doing it right first before the pain points and the value capture.
Mm,
Like, get the process right first. Right. If you go in this like, oh, I'm going to save money or I'm going to improve my throughput by 50%, or, like, yes, that's important. But first, get the process right. Like, get the process down that you sign off on, that you're agreeable to, then measure the baseline on day one.
yep,
Right. And then move on to what your objectives are for improving it with the partner. Right.
exactly.
Because everybody wants, like, I want to save money. I want to send out one extra invoice. Like, they've all set up the rah 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 moments, but they don't think about, like, hey, I don't really have the process set up yet, right?
I love
And
that.
and let's map that out first.
So maybe one of the episodes we can go a little bit deeper into. First of all, how do you assess the maturity of a process, and then how do you go about maturing a process, or what we call commoditized, right? Reaching a point where the process is commoditized, and then you can, ship it offshore. So, as you guys heard, shared services isn't really a one size fits all play. Some platforms start with two people handling billing. Others evolve into a full-blown center supporting multiple functions across brands, and some of it is onshore, some of it is nearshore, some of it is offshore. It's a hybrid setup, and this really, the structure changes, the size changes, right? But what doesn't change is why you build it. So it's not about being big enough to get going with the journey. It's about
Mhm.
reaching the point where growth creates complexity, and you
Yeah.
need a better way to run the business. So on our next episode, we're answering the question that always comes right after this. Well, wait, are we ready for shared services? How do I know? And because more often than not, if you're asking the question, you're already there. So that's it for today's episode, and I'll see you on the next one. Giner, thank you
Cool.
so much for your insights today.
No problem. I'll try to find a different background.